On the one hand, Abu Jandal was lamenting at the top of his voice, "Am I to be returned to the polytheists that they might entice me from my religion, O Muslims?" But, on the other hand, the faithful engagement was also considered to be necessary, above all other considerations. The Prophet's heart welled up with sympathy, but he wanted to honor his word at all costs. He consoled Abu Jandal and said, "Be patient, resign yourself to the will of Allah. Allah is going to provide for you and your helpless companions relief and means of escape. We have concluded a treaty of peace with them and we have taken the pledge in the name of Allah. We are, therefore, under no circumstances prepared to break it." Umar bin al-Khattab could not help giving vent to the deep-seated agony of his heart. He rose to his feet uttering words implying deep hatred and extreme indignation and requested Abu Jandal to take his sword and kill Suhail, but the son spared his father. However, in silent resignation was therefore, Abu Jandal bore away with his chains. When the peace treaty had been concluded, the Prophet, PBUH, ordered his companions to slaughter their sacrificial animals, but they were too depressed to do that. The Prophet, PBUH, gave instructions in this regard 3 times but with a negative response. He told his wife Salama about this attitude of his companions. She advised that he himself take the initiative, slaughter his animal and have his head shaved. Seeing that, the Muslims, with rent hearts, started to slaughter their animals and shave their heads. They even almost killed one another because of their distress. The Prophet, PBUH, prayed 3 times for those who shaved their heads and once for those who cut their hair. A camel was sacrificed on behalf of 7 men and a cow on behalf of the same number of people. The Prophet, PBUH, sacrificed a camel which once belonged to Abu Jahl and which the Muslims had seized as booty at Badr, thus enraging the polytheists. During the Al-Hudaybiyah campaign, the Prophet, PBUH, permitted Ka'b bin Ujra, who was in a state of ihram state of ritual consecration of the pilgrim, for Umrah, lesser pilgrimage, to shave his head due to illness, on the condition that he will pay compensation by sacrificing a sheep, fasting for 3 days or feeding 6 needy persons. Concerning this, the following verse was revealed, "And whosoever of you is ill or has an ailment in his scalp, necessitating shaving, he must pay a fidya, ransom, of either fasting, 3 days, or giving sadaqah, feeding 6 poor persons, or offering sacrifice, 1 sheep." Al-Quran 2-196. Meanwhile, some believing women emigrated to Medina and asked the Prophet, PBUH, for refuge, which they were granted. When their families demanded their return, he would not hand them back because the following verse was revealed, "O you who believe. When believing women come to you as emigrants, examine them. Allah knows best as to their faith. Then if you know them for true believers, send them not back to the disbelievers. They are not lawful wives for the disbelievers, nor are the disbelievers lawful husbands for them. But give the disbelievers that amount of money which they have spent, as their mahr, to them. And there will be no sin on you to marry them if you have paid their mahr to them. Likewise hold not the disbelieving women as wives." Al-Quran 60:10. The reason why the believing women were not handed back was either that they were not originally included in the terms of the treaty, which mentioned only men, or because the Quran abrogated any terms dealing with women in the verse, "O Prophet, when believing women come to you to give you the Baiji pledge, that they will not associate anything in worship with Allah." Al-Quran 60:12. This is the verse which forbade Muslim women from marrying disbelieving men. Likewise, Muslim men were commanded to terminate their marriages to disbelieving women. In compliance with this injunction, Umar bin al-Khattab divorced 2 wives he had married before he embraced Islam. Muawiyah married the first woman, and Safwan bin Umayyah married the second. Al-Hudaybiyah Treaty, sociopolitical impact. A series of events confirmed the profound wisdom and splendid results of the peace treaty, which Allah called a manifest victory. How could it be otherwise when Quraysh had recognized the legitimate Muslims' existence on the scene of political life in Arabia and began to deal with the believers on equal terms? Quraysh, in the light of the articles of the treaty, had indirectly relinquished its claim to religious leadership and admitted that they were no longer interested in people other than Quraysh, and washed their hands of any sort of intervention in the religious future of the Arabian Peninsula. The Muslims did not have in mind to seize people's property or kill them through bloody wars, nor did they ever think of pursuing any coercive approaches in their endeavors to propagate Islam. On the contrary, their sole target was to provide an atmosphere of freedom as regards ideology or religion. Then whosoever wills, let him believe, and whosoever wills, let him disbelieve. Al-Quran 1829. The Muslims, on the other hand, had the opportunity to spread Islam over areas not then explored. When there was an armistice, war was abolished, and men met and consulted together. None talked about Islam intelligently without entering it. Within the 2 years following the conclusion of the treaty, double as many entered Islam as ever before. This is supported by the fact that the Prophet, PBUH, went out to Al-Hudaybiyah with only 1,400 men, but when he set out to liberate Makkah, 2 years later, he had 10,000 men with him. The article of the treaty pertaining to the cessation of hostilities for 10 years points directly to the utter failure of political haughtiness exercised by Quraysh and its allies, and functions as evidence of the collapse and impotence of the war instigator. Quraysh had been obliged to lose those advantages in return for one seemingly in its favor but does not actually bear any harm against the Muslims, i.e., the article that speaks of handing over believing men who seek refuge with the Muslims without their guardians' consent to Quraysh. At first glance, it was a most distressing clause and was considered objectionable in the Muslim camp. However, in the course of events, it proved to be a great blessing. The Muslims sent back to Makkah were not likely to renounce the blessings of Islam. Contrariwise, those very Muslims turned out to be centers of influence for Islam. It was impossible to think that they would become apostates or renegades. The wisdom behind this truce assumed its full dimensions in some subsequent events. After the Prophet, PBUH, had reached Medina, Abu Basir, who had escaped from Quraysh, came to him as a Muslim. Quraysh sent 2 men demanding his return, so the Prophet, PBUH, handed him over to them. On the way to Makkah, Abu Basir managed to kill one of them, and the other one fled to Medina with Abu Basir in pursuit. When he reached the Prophet, PBUH, he said, "Your obligation is over and Allah has freed you from it. You duly handed me over to the men, and Allah has rescued me from them." The Prophet, PBUH, said, "Woe is his mother, he would have kindled a war if there had been others with him." When he heard that, he knew that he would be handed back to them, so he fled from Medina and went as far as Saif al-Bahr. The other Muslims who were oppressed in Makkah began to escape to Abu Basir. He was joined by Abu Jandal and others until a fair-sized colony was formed and soon sought revenge on Quraysh and started to intercept their caravans. The pagans of Makkah, finding themselves unable to control those exiled colonists, begged the Prophet, PBUH, to do away with the clause which governed the extradition. They implored him by Allah and by their ties of kinship to send for the group, saying that whoever joined the Muslims in Medina would be safe from them. So the Prophet, PBUH, sent for the group and they responded, as expected, positively. These are the realities of the clauses of the truce treaty, and as it seems they all function in favor of the nascent Islamic State. However, 2 points in the treaty made it distasteful to some Muslims, namely, they were not given access to the holy sanctuary that year, and the seemingly humiliating attitude as regards reconciliation with the pagans of Quraysh. Umar, unable to contain himself for the distress taking full grasp of his heart, went to the Prophet, PBUH, and said, "Aren't you the true messenger of Allah?" The Prophet, PBUH, replied calmly, "Why not?" Umar again spoke and asked, "Aren't we on the path of righteousness and our enemies in the wrong?" Without showing any resentment, the Prophet, PBUH, replied that it was so. On getting this reply he further urged, "Then we should not suffer any humiliation in the matter of faith." The Prophet, PBUH, was unruffled and with perfect confidence said, I am the true messenger of Allah, I never disobey him, he shall help me. Did you not tell us, rejoined Umar, that we shall perform pilgrimage? But I have never told you, replied the Prophet, PBUH, that we shall do so this very year. Umar was silenced. But his mind was disturbed. He went to Abu Bakr and expressed his feelings before him. Abu Bakr, who had never been in doubt as regards the Prophet's truthfulness and veracity, confirmed what the Prophet, PBUH, had told him. In due course, the chapter of victory, 48th, was revealed, saying, Verily, we have given you, O Muhammad, PBUH, a manifest victory. Al-Quran 48:1. The Messenger of Allah, PBUH, summoned Umar and imported to him the happy tidings. Umar was overjoyed, and greatly regretted his former attitude.